welcome everyone to the New Directions Women's Fitness Podcast. We're going to be taking a slight detour today in that we're going to be going down and talking about people's transformational stories, but that are a little bit more broad and really going through Samantha's history today. So Samantha Richards, who's joining me amazingly and has put up her hand. Yeah, Samantha has an incredible story. I don't know all of it yet, but just from the little bit that I do know of, it's phenomenal and transformational. And the work that you do with kids is, I think everyone should get on board of that. I know that I would definitely want my children to be engaged in the activities that you promote and services that you provide. So I'd like to keep it in suspense a little bit. So without further ado, Samantha, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I'm actually really excited to be chatting with you today. This is the first time I've got the chance to tell my whole life story. I normally tell bits, my weight loss, very business change, or going into a different career after 40. So this is really nice for me to be able to tell you my story. So thank you so much. I'm really grateful that you've given me this platform to do it.
No, yeah.
I'm 51 years old. Eek, I'm getting there. But I was born in Malta. And in 1969, that seems like such a long time ago. And from Malta, I moved to the UK. My father was in the army when we were in Malta, and then I think he left the army and we moved to the UK when I was roughly 2 years old. So obviously I don't have any memories of that. I only know what my sisters have told me. And we stayed in the UK for about 3 years or so. And then my dad got a job in Iran. But here's a really interesting fact. Prior to that job with Iran, they had been looking to move to Australia, to Magnetic Island. And because the visas were taking so long, Dad actually did a gentleman's handshake on a job to go over to Iran. And because he believes that his word is his honor, and then the visas came through, he took the job with Iran so that he wouldn't let them down. And we lived in a place called Shiraz. And I can't tell you how amazing Iran was to me as a little girl. We used to go to the bazaars. They were like Aladdin's cave. You'd go in, the smell of spices would hit you, the babble of words, people drinking tea pouring it into saucers. I loved it. And what was so funny was over a period of time, my brother was, not so much now, he's grey now, sorry, Mike. He was platinum blonde and blue-eyed, lily white skin, and then there was me. I was the chocolate drop. I was very, very dark when I was little, dark hair, dark eyes, and when we'd go to these bazaars, you'd see the Iranian men and women walk up to my brother and touch his head, and they go, "Oh, God is blessing you. You are blessed by God," because he was so blonde. And I'd sit back and I'd observe. And eventually, I'm 7 years old, by the way, at this point. My brother's 5, and I would observe. And I realized that I could make some money.
So entrepreneurial spirit begins.
Absolutely. So my brother and I went home and concocted a plan. And what I would do is at the base of his head, the nape of his neck, because we had people looking after us. Mum was working at an orphanage, looking after kids at an orphanage. So we had people looking after us. You call them nannies, I suppose. So I would cut my brother's hair at the very base of his neck. And when we would go back to the bazaars, and they'd touch his hair and say, "God has blessed you," out would come the hair, wrapped in Glad wrap or something, or in a bag. And I'd say, in perfect Farsi, because I could speak Farsi. I don't speak it anymore. but I would say, and God wants you to be blessed too. And if you take this boy's hair for sweetbread, God will bless you. I haggled Persian rugs. You will not believe the things that Mike and I haggled for using his hair. And it was unbelievable. I eventually got grounded for it when Mum worked it out. So that was an interesting time. What ended up happening was, during the time that I was in Iran, we were street kids. I was nicknamed the Kuche kid, which is a street kid. Never indoors, always out. And over a period of time, Mum and I think because I was quite a strong-willed child as well, our relationship started deteriorating, and I was a little bit jealous of my brother. And looking back now, I was a kid, but what do you do? From about the age of 7, I started becoming a bit of a problem child. And when the Shah was overthrown by the Ayatollah Khomeini, my family and I were evacuated with nothing but the clothes on our back. And I remember playing and on the street, I'm pretty sure it was on the street, and being picked up and run with. And I thought I was being stolen, because kids do go missing. Next minute, I'm at the airport. Mum, my brother, my baby sister are there. And it turned out it was my dad. My dad had got one of the drivers to pick me up and drive me to the airport. He was already there with Mum, because I may not have finished school, or I was playing on the street, or I'd done what I usually do, which was disappear into nowhere, and they can't find me, as kids do. And we were sent off. My father had to stay behind to get the other expats out, and then he was detained. I believe he was arrested. And for the next 6 months, we didn't see him. And as a kid, 9 years old, not quite 10, I thought my dad was going to die. I thought I'd never see him again. So that was a really traumatic thing, waiting. And I remember seeing him at the airport when we went to pick him up. And it was, Daddy! And you run and you chuck yourself around him. It was probably one of the best days of my life, seeing Dad come home from having been detained. When in England, I was then placed into school. Excuse me. Now, I could speak English fluently, but I couldn't read or write. Not particularly well, anyway. And I remember being in a boarding school. And we were learning, this is in primary school, we were learning, sorry.
Take your time.
We were learning how to do, words that sound the same but have different meanings. Mm-hmm. I think they're called homophobes. Are they a homophobe or something like that? And I remember being in primary school, and I was illiterate. And I was teased because I was illiterate. And I was teased because I was dark, very dark. And I'm sitting there, I'm writing these, what I thought was homophone. And I did made and made. You and I would know that now as M-A-D-E and M-A-I-D. But I couldn't think of, I knew made in my head, M-A-I-D, but I didn't know how to spell it. And I wrote made and mad. Teacher came by and looked over my shoulder and said, Samantha, stand up. And I thought, well, in my young mind, I thought, well, at least she's going to say, at least I tried, because I had only learned how to read and write as I was just at school in England, much later than everyone else. And I will never forget her words. The words we use with children can do incredible damage or lift them to great heights, but hers damaged me. And the words she used was, children, look at Samantha, words to the effect of, this was what roughly she said. Samantha is an example of what not to do. Her stupidity will mean that she'll never make anything in life. I was 10, roughly 11, so I was fresh out, leaving Iran, the only home I'd ever known, really. The only culture I truly understood. And that public humiliation that day, I never applied myself to studies again. I felt myself absolutely destroyed from the inside out. That same teacher, at the end of term once, we were then going home, we're cleaning up the room, said to me, well, at least if you never make anything in life, at least you'll make a good housewife. Now, I've always been known for my quick retorts. It did get me into a lot of trouble because my retort was, well, miss, at least I'll leave school, which did get me into a lot of trouble. But I then tried to run away from school. I just became a really problematic child, because if the teacher told me I was stupid, of course I must be.
Yeah,
Why would I try?
If the authority figure tells you you're stupid, you must be.
Absolutely. And when you're that young, the words we use, words are so powerful. They cut you to your core. So eventually I was asked to leave that school because I became such a problematic child. I then went to another school, got myself suspended, and then asked to leave. I spiraled out of control. I wasn't understood in England. I wasn't adjusting to the new life, the new culture, the new expectations. And then eventually I was asked to leave, polite way of saying expelled, from 3 schools by the time I was 13. And my parents were living in Sudan, in Kenana in Sudan at that time. And it was my way of, if I played up, they'd take me with them. And I'd be out of the English culture because I couldn't adjust. And actually in Sudan, I had an amazing life, okay? One of the most wonderful experiences I remember of living in Kenana, this is obviously before the terrible wars that happened there, the civil wars that happened there, was going to the sugarcane plantation that my father was the managing director of, and being shown around how the sugar is made. And then we would drive away and you could smell sweetness in the air, and it was molasses. And what they would do, and this is what I love about traveling, you learn new things. Because it's not a rich country, Africa's not rich, or certain parts of Africa, certainly where I was living wasn't rich. They would use the molasses when they're laying the tar, they'd put the pebbles down, pour the molasses over to stick it all together, all the pebbles, before they laid the tar. And that was yep.
What is molasses? Like,
oh, sorry. Molasses is what is not used from the sugar. So you call it the sludge.
Gotcha.
People actually eat molasses as a healthier substitute to sugar. But I personally have never liked it. It's far too sweet. I'm not a massive sweet tooth anyway. But you could smell the sweetness rising from the ground when the sun hit. And then my brother would eat the tar because he would be in there trying to eat the tar. It was hilarious. So it was a wonderful time living in Sudan. And I actually have very, very fond memories of it. All of this is in between getting kicked out of schools, by the way, because I'd be sent back to another school. My parents would desperately try to get me into schools. And because I don't think I ever quite got over the leaving with nothing but the clothes on our backs. and being bullied for being illiterate or any of that. So I ended up going with my parents to a place called Shaki in Nigeria. I was about 14, and Shaki is, or I don't know what it's like now, obviously, but it was a tiny little village, and I think maybe had 6 or 7 white people in it, and they would all be part of a community that was helping the locals. So my father built, I keep calling it a dam, it wasn't, it was more of a reservoir type thing where he had fresh water in one side, he was an engineer, and fish in the other side, so that he got pumps in to turn the water over. It was actually fabulous what he did for the community, bringing fresh water in and fresh fish for their diet. Because, and the reason why I'm telling you that is my brother and I, to entertain us, any parent any parent knows this, you look for ways to entertain children, okay? We're hard to entertain. Kids are hard to entertain because they're always going, what can I do next? So my parents sent my brother and I off to the local hospital. And I remember walking in and whisked off. We were put into these blue gowns, hospital gowns, wasn't quite understanding what we were needing to do. And Mike went off to help one of the nurses who was training the locals up to do nursing. And I was taken into a what are they called? Operating theatre. And there on a bed was a girl. And I remember asking her age. I said, how old is she? Heavily pregnant. She was 15 years old on, I think, her 2nd or 3rd child. Yeah, I think it was at least 2, having a cesarean. And I was in there at the age of 14-ish, and I watched them cut her open. I could handle that, strangely. What I couldn't handle was the groaning that she was doing as they were doing, and I fainted. I just couldn't handle that. I fainted. And so they whisked me out of there and said, you can go help your brother. What I didn't know at the time was that what my brother was actually doing, so we both did this, when children or babies are malnourished, so let's say your diet is predominantly sweet potato, yam, or rice, or something like that, you're not getting all the nutrients into your body. And quite a lot of those babies were being born with, I want terracotta coloured hair, so reddish. And that was showing that they didn't have malnourished. So what my brother and I were doing was, in newborn babies, along with the nurse, helping them to put intravenous drips into these newborn babies. So I'm 14, my brother's 12, and quite often with malnourished babies, they can be a bit dehydrated. This is what they told me, okay? I'm not a doctor. I don't know.
It does make sense, though. That is pretty logical. Yes.
Yeah. And if you can't find in the hand, they put it in the temple, the vein in the temple, or in the head. They find a vein in the head. And I remember Mike and I going, why are they trusting us? We're children. Why are they trusting us with a needle and putting it into babies' heads? And I remember crying as I was doing it because I thought I was hurting the child. I didn't realize it was for their benefit. It was to help them survive and everything else like that. And there were babies born with scabs all over their bodies. It was a really hard thing to see as a child. I want to liken it a little bit to what we have today of entertaining children through YouTube or something like that, where we entertain through digital nowadays and maybe get-togethers and things like that. The entertaining was very, very physical in those days of getting the kids to interact.
can I just jump
Sure.
in and ask a couple of questions? So,
Mm.
because this does raise a couple of questions in my mind. So, I'm imagining that your pet, like, two things. One, that in order for you to get into those rooms, that your parents might have been relatively important people or people that were connected to the hospital, and then this was their form of education for you. Is like, did you ever talk to your parents like afterwards?
No.
Because
It was funny because as kids, you know, I actually think about it. We didn't really talk to our parents about the experiences that we had there. It was almost, how do you liken it? It, it was almost as if going out for a bike ride. Did you have a nice bike ride? Yeah. And that's it. There was never any digging from my parents. And yes, Dad was a very important person. He's wherever he's worked, he's always been very important in that country, or as in the village or wherever it was. He worked for 10 years in Mongolia and changed the economy around because he worked for World Bank and changed their economy around, having worked there for Ulaanbaatar. I never went there. Anything really cold does not suit me. I was given the skin color to cope with the heat, you know. So it's an interesting question. I've never thought about that. It's something that I really do need to really evaluate. Why wasn't I? Maybe they did. I just don't remember them asking. Maybe I didn't answer them.
oh, I guess the question more is like, yeah, the question that comes to my mind is how many other children were allowed into those rooms to provide care? And I like, as much as on one hand, I do know, for example, of people that I know that were paramedics that, for example, here they would not be allowed to do certain procedures, but when they were in Africa, yes, they were delivering babies and that kind of thing. So but I mean, they're still highly educated. So whereas
Yeah.
perhaps it was more yeah, I just assumed that it was you were sent there for a reason. It wasn't, and I'm totally speculating, so I could be wrong, but it seems like an intentional decision as opposed to a random, just go check out what's happening down at the hospital.
I think so. Look, you could be right there. You could be right, but there was very little for us to do apart from play on the streets. And we spent a lot of time, Mike and I, hanging out in mud huts and going and hang out with the local kids. We've always been, Mike and I were always very people, and he still is, I still am, people, if that, people person, but when you're people, there's two of us. So I don't know. I think it was, we didn't go every time to the hospital or anything like that. It was, I just have that vivid memory of, or maybe we went before, but that one was particularly stuck in my mind because I think the girl being 15, so close to my own age, and having to have a cesarean because her pelvis was too narrow. And so it wasn't her first cesarean, but they were teaching the local men. There was a Filipino doctor who was teaching the local men to do this because eventually they were going to leave. And they don't do the cesarean, or they might do nowadays, but back then they don't do the cut this way. It went straight up. Exactly. And that's what I think also freaked me out, was seeing that. But there was another thing that happened in Shaki, and actually, you know, when you sometimes think, have I created a false memory? Because I had nightmares, and the nightmare was so vivid, it's so strong, and I would wake up screaming. And what actually happened, and then it wasn't until I started having therapy that I realized it wasn't a false memory. It was a memory that was so traumatic that I actually buried it. And until I started getting help and working through all those other things, that's when it came through. And I remember, and I won't go into details because I don't want to give anyone else nightmares. It took me a long time to handle this. But I remember hearing Mike and I played on the streets all the time. And so we were always out, never saw our parents from the minute we got up, had breakfast, we were gone. And we might come in, snack, but we were gone. And I remember hearing a girl scream and following. So by the time I was 14, I'd already saved 2 people's lives from drowning, once in Iran when I was about 9, and my sister in Sudan. So my instinct is to help. I think most normal people's instinct is to help. And I heard a girl, well, it sounded like a girl, the pitch was so high, screaming, and I followed the noise, and I came across a hut that had this smell coming from the hut was incense, like an incensey type smell, and there was a gap where the door shuts. There was a slight gap because it's all mud huts, slight gap, and I remember peering through the gap, and there was a girl on an altar. Needless to say, I couldn't save her life. And that day, she was my age. She looked like she was my age. And unfortunately, she died. And I heard a very clear message to me going, if you can see him, he can see you, run now. And it's a bit like the movie, you know, when someone goes like that, and then and I just bolted. And I remember going home, and I think that created post-traumatic stress disorder in me. So by the time I was 14, I suffered post-traumatic stress disorder because I had nightmares. And when Dad visited in 2014, I said to him, Dad, did kids go missing in Shaki? He said, they went missing all the time. I said, did I ever talk about, and then explained it? And he said, I was wondering, no, you never spoke about it, but I was wondering why you went quiet. So I'd completely withdrawn into myself and wasn't able to speak about that. So that was something which was really hard for me to, and I think because my relationship with my mother wasn't good, even though my relationship with Dad was really good, Dad was never home. He was always working. So you go into yourself as children. It's funny, kids are amazingly resilient, strong creatures. But if we leave them to their own devices, they go into themselves. And that open dialogue really needs, and I wish that I'd had that. I wish I'd had the courage to talk to someone, because from there I didn't know how to handle it. So I became even more of a problem child and kept running away and actually, I remember us going back to England again. I was just hitting 15 and having an almighty row with my mum and her kicking me out. And I was homeless. I had nowhere to go. I had no money. I had just the clothes on my back. And I'm not going to hate her for it, because I'm a mum now. And when you have teenagers, and I'm not making an excuse for her either, I'm just making that clear. When you have teenagers, and particularly I was a massive problem as well, but I don't think anybody identified that I needed help. And that was a bigger issue. So I slept on a park bench for a couple of nights, and eventually I befriended a girl who'd had her own newborn baby and slept on her floor. And then I went home with my tail between my legs. And I remember Mum saying, this is where, it was a metal, what was it called, camping mug. This is what they drink out of in prison. Bang. And then if you carry on the way you're going, I'm like, okay, so I'm destined for prison.
Do you think that you would have, do you think that you would have accepted help? Like, do you
I
think you
don't
would have
know.
even trusted help?
I don't think I would have trusted, because you see, I had trust issues. I think when you're not close to one parent, I think that creates trust issues. I didn't trust government because I was forced to leave the country that I loved because of civil war and being British. Actually, they were really targeting the Americans at the time, but because of Dad's job, I remember in Iran sitting in tanks, would be in the palace gardens, and my brother and I were climbing into the chieftain tanks and things like that. I didn't trust people not to do the right thing. And then I was bullied at school. Power, someone in a position of authority destroyed my self-confidence in my intelligence. So I think that you're right. Maybe I wouldn't have accepted help, but it was, again, I don't know, because it was never offered.
Yeah, it sounds like, so there's slightly archetypal story that usually happens between obviously a daughter and mother, especially when the father or husband is away for highly extended periods of time, where it's very easy for the dad to dote obviously on the daughter, and then for the mother to become very resentful of that. And then obviously once that cycle begins, it just is positively feedback looped, and and things go down negatively. So at what point did things start to turn around? Do you remember something that happened where things started to shift for you?
Yeah, I actually was thinking the greatest on from the Nigeria. I then moved to Cyprus, didn't do well there at school either. And then I moved back to England. My final school persevered with me. They refused to kick me out. And believe me, I tried.
I bet you did.
So I was always 2 years behind. So at the age of 17, what would be equivalent doing VCE now, I was doing back then CSEs and GCSEs. So HSC equivalent here of what you would understand. They didn't kick me out. Had I applied myself, I actually think I would have done really well, because I'd studied 2 weeks before my exams and I didn't do too badly, but I did leave equivalent of no qualifications because they weren't bar two, they weren't passes. They were, but they were the passes for what I call the not smart class. Okay, because I was in the not smart class. And I then developed a bravado to hide the pain. And I think this is important to my story, because when we're going through difficult times, we put on a face. It's a bit like the Facebook face. My life is fantastic. Everything's great. But behind the scenes, people are struggling. Okay. So you put on a bravado. And I think I had a very hard edge to me. So it was the life's, I felt like I was a victim to life. Okay. And I lived that victimhood. But it wasn't until I was about 19, 20, and my first love relationship broke up. And I went back out to Nigeria and lived in Lagos. And this is where I think unconsciously I understood that what I then led into what I do now actually came from that scenario. And I worked for the British High Commission. I was a PA to the first secretary of the Commercial Economic Department. We would go out, I'd do the normal stuff that a PA does, but what we would also go out and do is investigate fraud. And although I sat there, didn't say anything, he did the talking, we would have the British companies would contact us because they thought that they might have been scammed. And this was in the days when it was via telex and things like that. So we would then go and investigate whether the Nigerian company was legit or not, and things like that, which was fascinating to do. And that's where I started reading the body language of what was being said to me, and also because of what I'd gone through in life. My little entrepreneurial ability at the age of 7 to watch people's behavior and then sell based on that, it actually ended up playing very much in my favor when I was stopped. Now, I was in a diplomatic car. It was my late brother-in-law's car. He had been away and he'd let us use his Land Rover, and our driver was driving me, and got stopped at a checkpoint. Now, it wasn't the first time. The other times I'd had the guns pointed at me, it was just pointed, okay? And it was just, they didn't want me out of the car or anything else like that. They wanted what they call dash. What have you for me, madam? Dash. I need you money, you know. And you'd hand money over, they let you go. This particular time, we got pulled over. The gun didn't lower, what have you for me. It didn't lower, it came closer. And I remember putting my hand on Bernard's shoulder to say, stop, don't move. What we had been told is if you're ever told to get out of the car, don't do it. Because twofold, you'll either be mugged or raped. So I said, and I knew if either I did that, I wouldn't have survived. I'd be dead today. I would have been raped and murdered. Because his gun came completely to my head and he grabbed me by the hair and he's saying, get out of the car. Get out of the car now. And I'm saying, I'm not getting out of the car. Bernard's holding on to the steering wheel, but I'd already told him not to do anything because if he had intervened, he would have been executed immediately. With me, there's always a hesitation. And I said, I'm not getting out of the car. And he started trying to drag me out of the car. And I said, go and look at the number plate. And I did spoken pidgin, okay? So I don't want to offend anybody, but I will do the way that I spoke. I said, go look for the number plate. Do you want to cause an international incident? Do you want to be hunted down like a dog by the British government if you kill me now? And he went and had a look at the number plate. Because what I had done, my world, everything in my life flashed before my eyes. It was my childhood, it's like my childhood, all of that trauma I'd gone through before was nothing. And it's slow motion. And as I was being pulled out, and when I was saying that to him, what I realized when he was leaning into me with the gun to my head, he had fear in his eyes too. He was determined to get what he wanted. But I saw this little glimmer of fear, and I saw that glimmer of fear, and I knew it was his own mortality. Because in Africa, mortality rate is high. And I don't know what happened, how that kicked in on me, that ability suddenly in that terrifying crisis moment. And poor Bernard, I could tell he wanted to rescue me. He wanted to save me. I couldn't let him do that. I couldn't let him risk his life. I had a better chance of survival, as bizarre as that sounds. And the guy went and looked at the number plate. He let go of my hair. We stayed there, and I'm breathing, and I'm going, Bernard, don't do anything. Don't do anything. Well, let us go. Let us go. Let us go. And you know when you're just going, please, 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 please. And he looked at the number plate, and he stood there, and he went, and we left. Bernard drove me home, and I remember curling up under the covers and sobbing because I was that close to being killed. And it was which then re-triggered post-traumatic stress. So wasn't able to, but I didn't know it was post-traumatic stress at the time. I've only learned this since I got help. But it was the most terrifying physical day of my personal life was seeing your life flash before your eyes and not knowing if you're going to survive. And I think now I am alive. Hello, I'm healthy. Thank God for my gift of the gab and my ability to read situations. But I think that's what, sorry?
Oh no, I want to know what happened after that, because so you've just been stripped of your vulnerability and the fact that you're any sense of security in anything. I guess you're just, it highlights your mortality and that someone can rip everything away from you like that.
Exactly.
What happened. Yeah.
Exactly. I wasn't 10 foot tall and invincible like I thought I was. Now, I'd learned Shotokan, martial arts. I knew if I got out of that car, and now I'm not saying I was a black belt or anything equally, it was more street fighting style, but I knew that day that no amount of martial arts would have saved me. So you use other things and you really realize how vulnerable you are. Mortality, your own mortality, things that we take for granted every single day. I hear kids going, nah, I won't get coronavirus. I'm young. Maybe not, but you can't see your enemy. At least I could see mine. Yeah, it was, so I did realize my mortality, and that was another confronting thing to go through. So eventually I left there and I moved back to the UK, and I worked in private equity.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for, at that point, it was it was up and coming, but now I believe is one of the most impactful private equity firms. At the time, it was called Doughty Hanson and Co. And I worked as a PA there. And I just kept being a PA wherever I worked. And it was interesting seeing how private equity works, how they negotiate and who they're going to then invest in. And I had shares in Tag Heuer because of that was part of my perks. Obviously, when I left, I had to sell them back. They bought them from me. And then I worked for companies like Lehman Brothers. So it's investment banking, mergers and acquisitions. And I was a PA for the MD of, I can't remember the full name of it, but it's the healthcare area of it. So the Sanofi-Synthélabo mergers at that point, I think they're now called something else, pharmaceutical companies. And some of these were hostile takeover bids. Some were simple mergers, but they were acquisitions and all of that. And the amount of minutiae I was dealing with, sending information, we're talking millions and millions and millions of dollars. If I'd sent the wrong person that information, I would have lost my job. So it was actually, I never got to sit in the meetings, and I wish that I had, because that would have been fascinating to sit in those meetings. But it was really interesting watching how the dynamic, and we had people, I had people, I'm not name dropping here, but I am going to say, but I had people, for example, Princess Diana rang. She was friends with a chap called Kirill Satskobo, Prince Kirill Satskobo. So we had some extraordinary, Prince Albert rang for Satskobo, and I would be speaking to these people. It was an extraordinary change from the life that I led in Africa to talking to these people on the phone, and perfectly charming, you know, particularly Princess Diana. I said, oh, Your Royal Highness. She said, no, call me Diana. She was very informal. It was really nice. So I stayed there and until 1999, but in 1998, I met my hubby.
Hold on. Because I do want to just stay on that before we just like go.
Before we go on to the romantic relationship?
Yes.
Okay.
So, because I could imagine people listening to basically that last portion of the story and going, how on earth did a girl that just scraped through her studies all of a sudden end up being in effectively the diplomat circles and then moving into the major banks of the world? So I'm assuming, tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that your dad may have played. No, not at all.
I
Can you,
was
yeah, can you tell us
brilliant
about
at
how you?
interviewing. I
Yes.
was
Okay.
I was so good at interviewing. So with the British High Commission, my father had some influence there, absolutely, when I worked in Nigeria. And having worked at the British High Commission gave me a leg in to all of these other companies. But one thing, even here in Australia, and this is when I get to that talking about the jobs much later in life, one thing I've always been very good at is interviewing, creating that rapport. I'm also incredibly organized. I'm detail oriented. So in whatever job I worked in, I didn't just do my job. So for example, I will look at where there are areas that can improve on. So bespoke computer systems and the way things are working. Are we hogging? Is one area not working? How can we streamline that? Because time management equals cost effectiveness. So if you've got people that are charging an hourly rate or working at huge sums of money, and they're hunting for things, or we couldn't find them because of the poor organization, costs a lot of money. So I would sometimes look at how, as an admin, we could save. So I've saved companies hundreds of thousands of dollars, various. Even today, that thing flows through in some of those companies. But the way I did it was I will put the thought, I will plant the seed with the appropriate person and let them take it as their idea.
Which is very
Because
effective.
because quite honest, to be quite frank with you, if you have a secretary, PA, executive assistant coming up and saying, I've got an idea, they're very likely to say, don't care, do your job. So I'd plant the seed and I'd say, oh, how long does it take for you to find or do? And I go, oh, okay. So that could be to do with the computer systems, not actually, or the department's not communicating properly because of the computers. And then suddenly, bang, everything would be sorted out.
Yes, wonderful form of influence, and also I'm certain that they were aware of your talent in the lightest touch as well, and appreciative of the fact that you weren't also trying to have the limelight shed on you. Instead, it was no, I'm just going to be here making everything work beautifully. Or yeah, that's wonderful. Okay. Yeah, no, I'm sure there's a lot more to it than even that. But
Well, I'm a researcher, so when I go for job interviews, let's say I was interviewing for you, to come to work for you, I don't just obviously research. Most secretaries don't research everything. They'll research the company, look at perhaps what the company's turnover has been. I'll actually research you. I'll actually research your surname, find out the potential background of where that surname comes from to create rapport. And it's actually always been very effective. And I think the other thing is in interviewing is to have a nice open demeanor, friendly, you smile, you mirror image. If you're showing nervousness, so I now doing what I do, I teach people how to interview as well as communicate. I think I was always very lucky in that way. And speaking the way I do, I'm quite articulate. I pronounce things correctly. And even if you have a French accent and you're going to speak English with a French accent, pas de problème. You want to have it very clear on what you are wanting to say. So it's being articulate and sat. I didn't have the qualifications, but I had the street knowledge. And I would go into meetings, introduce myself before my boss would come in, sit them down. Would you like tea or coffee? And particularly with board meetings or anything like that, and I would do an assessment on everybody that was in there, and I'd go out and say, Mary Jane's in a foul temper, putting on a face. Or so-and-so, soft touch, but can be ferocious. Yeah, it was just by those through, I'd learned how to read people, body language, and what people said through their facial expressions, the little tick that they would get, or an awkward smile. Nice to meet you. Okay. You could see whether they'd had a good night or not. And that actually really helps when you're going for job interviews. And I had one company here in Australia say, okay, fine, the CEO, tell me about me, tell me the 2 other interviewers. And I went bang, 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 bang. And do you know what? I didn't get that job. This was part of the time that I didn't. I was up against a girl with a double degree, and I was shortlisted for that. And I didn't get it because of the double degree. But I was shortlisted to being the other person simply because of my ability to do all of that. And obviously history and ability is what I've done in my work history.
Yes, no, that's fantastic. And I'm glad you clarified that as well, like how you found those positions, because that says an enormous amount. Okay, so now you've fallen in love, or you're about to.
I absolutely was about to. And it was quite funny because I had gone on a date with someone from Lehman Brothers, an executive director from Lehman Brothers, who'd eventually asked me out, and a Frenchman. And I've always liked the French. I love their culture and everything else like that. So I thought, awesome, I'm being asked out by a French guy. I like this. And we went to Notting Hill. I drove an hour and a half, went home on the Friday night, drove an hour, and got dressed, make yourself look pretty, or try to at least. Drove an hour and a half back up to London, went on the date, and he got absolutely pie-eyed. And I was eyeing every other woman up in the joint. And I could feel this rage bubbling in me of the disrespect of it. It's like, why did I bother? What was the point of this? I hear an Aussie accent. And by the way, I can do many accents. I've worked out I can do about 12 accents. Australian is not my best one, so be prepared. And I heard a voice going, oh, yeah, the girls in here are quite pretty. My students tell me to stop doing it all the time. Don't do the Aussie accent. So I was having a dreadful night. And this voice is coming up from here. And all I did was look and snarl, okay? Because it was, really? So, and that was my husband and his mate.
I was like, oh, maybe the Frenchman ends up coming to Australia as well. No.
No.
How you just, because this is wonderful. So how on earth did you go from obviously sitting down with the chauvinistic Frenchman to then repositioning yourself? How did that, like in the wherever you were, the bar or the restaurant?
We were sitting down having a meal. And it was a really funny restaurant. Nick remembers more details because he remembers walking past and him seeing fogged up windows and a man standing at the door with a parrot on his shoulder. Okay.
Wow.
And whereas I don't actually remember that because he was out with the boys and I was just sitting there fuming. And then what happened there was one of Nick's friends started distracting this guy. Because I think Nick must have done the elbow pointing at me. I don't know what he did. He hasn't fully told me, but I know how blokes think. And then Nick started talking. So he talked to me first, the other guy, and then distracted the French guy. And then Nick and I were talking. And I thought, oh, he's a bit of all right. And he's tall. I'm like, tall man. Dark. He's handsome. It was that atypical, because he's 6'3" now, he's shrunk, but he was 6'4", 6'5" at the time. And I thought, I want to go on a date with him. This guy is gone. French man is gone. And I'd be having words with him at work. That I knew that would happen. and for his appalling behaviour, but I wasn't going to do it in a public place there and then, although I did think about it. And I went down to the loo, wrote my number on a piece of paper, don't judge me. And as I walked past Nick, he put his hand like that and I dropped my number in, and we've been together ever since.
Fantastic. So I'm sure as well he gets bonus points for the, you know, maneuvering in and rescuing. Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, that was all right.
Exactly. And then what was really funny was he was in the UK probably for another 6 months or so before he had to leave to come back to Australia. His visa had run out. And I thought, oh, I like him enough. I'll join him, but I wanted to do it on a working holiday visa. I wanted to do it off my own steam. I had done scuba diving before. I thought, I know. I'll go and get my scuba diving certificate and I'll teach scuba diving in Australia. And that was my intention, was to come out to Australia because I was all about sport, because I didn't believe I was academic. I was very athletic at school, wanted to do the Olympics, swam for my for my county, played lacrosse for Surrey. Yeah, I wanted to be in the Olympics and didn't quite make it. And I thought, I know, I'll teach people how to scuba dive. It's exotic. And then
It is, I'm agreeing.
It is. But also in England, back then, maybe their views have changed a lot. Our view of the Australian male is the surfer dude. Okay. The blonde, hippie-like surfer dude. And I thought, yeah, this will be cool. I like hippies. I can hang out with hippies. And if we don't work out, that's fine. Anyway.
You've got the backup plan sorted. Got it.
I had the backup plan sorted. I think I've always been, make sure you look after yourself. And we would be on the phone. I didn't leave, so he left in the June. I didn't join him till the June. Yeah, around about the November of '99. And we'd be on the phone every night. My parents would get really cross because of the length of the phone calls and how much it cost. And because I'd go and stay with them and then still phone. Every single day we talked. And I think he heard a bit of reluctance because I sold my house to join him. I gave up my career at Lehman Brothers to join him. And I was sharing a house with my sister. She had to sell then. She couldn't afford to buy me out. So I had pushed and forced a scenario to be with him. And effectively, not gave up my friends, but you know when you're used to a certain group of people and things like that. Anyway, I think you could hear the doubt in my voice about coming. And he said, Sam, I went, what? Marry me. I went, what? He goes, marry me. I went, yes, please.
So this is over the phone, obviously.
Over the phone.
Yeah.
Over the phone. And it was lovely. And then when I did come out, that Christmas, we went to see his family in Broken Hill. And he took me up to the Pinnacles. And I always knew Broken Hill from the Mad Max movies because they have it on the credits and things like that. So he took me up to the Pinnacles to propose properly, okay? However, we're standing on the Pinnacles and I'm being eaten alive by mosquitoes. I'm literally, my body is covered in mosquitoes. So he quickly proposes and then we run back. It was actually a really nice proposal. And then 6 months later, we got married.
And so did any of your family come to Australia? I don't need to touch on it too much, but yeah, I did, because obviously that's a long way to go. And yeah, how did that all go?
Well, my youngest sister came because she was already here. So we actually timed it around my youngest sister. No one else was planning on coming. And my other family members chipped in to pay for mum to fly out. Dad was in Mongolia. So my sister's nickname is Dolly.
Nice.
She will hate me for saying that. So her name's Karina Alexandra. She goes by Alex. And Dad gave her his speech for her to read out. She was mortified because she felt it was the most embarrassing speech on the planet. Mum came, and then we had a really small, intimate wedding. And we put it on our credit card. So our credit card limit was $8,000. And that's what we had it at the Stoke House before it burnt down. And Nick's a graphic and web designer. So he did all of our invitations. His sister's a beautiful artist. She did table decorations. Sorry. It was actually, people have commented, we had no dancing or anything like that. It was just an intimate 34 people sit down. And in England, we don't give speeches. Brides don't give speeches. Now, this is what I find fascinating about language. So, for example, they were, Sam, speech. I'm going, what? I haven't prepared anything. So all the boys, husbands, best man, they get a chance to prepare speech. I didn't do public speaking. And I winged it anyway. What I didn't realize is the two meanings, same English words, interpretation here in Australia versus English meaning. And one of the guests started heckling me just as a joke. It wasn't aggressive or anything like that. And I went, oi, cut it out or I'll have you later. Now, in England, it means, way or beat you up. In Australia, it means, hey, baby. And and my poor husband had to go because his wife stared at me in horror.
It wasn't a single man, it was...
He was a married man, stared at me in horror. And Nick had to translate. He said, she means she's going to beat you up. And everybody went, oh. So it was a real eye-opener into the difference in how we speak, even in the interpretation of certain words. So after that, I became very careful. Yeah, I became very, very careful.
Cool. So your sass, it was kept up. It was, that's fascinating. And so, so you obviously, what ended up happening as far as your work life goes? Because I've heard not similar stories at all, but as in the similar situations where someone will leave their home country or the country that they're set up in to come into their partner's country, and then it puts a lot of pressure on the relationship if there isn't those other pillars. Because obviously then it's like, oh, okay, you either got to get a new friendship group, and then maybe the other partner's going, oh, I'm getting jealous now. Or on the flip side, they're overwhelmed with the pressure of being friend, partner, family.
Yeah.
How did the transition go? And did you find work straight away?
I came straight into work. I already applied for jobs, and when I say came straight into work, straight into interviews with recruitment agents. So from the UK, I had made sure that I had set myself up to get some work, and I found it very easy to get work when I first came. What I found really hard was understanding the price, the salary bracket. I was on a very, very good salary in Lehman Brothers for the time. And in fact, it was at that point when you look at the bonuses, I got a bonus from my boss, bonus from the company, and all of those things with my base salary, I was probably on about £37,000 back then. That's roughly what top PAs get paid now. So I was classified as being cream of the crop, but I wasn't being paid cream of the crop salary here. So I didn't understand. And that was a really tough one for me to adjust to, because I'd take on a job, and in one company I was the EA, the office manager. I did all the events management. I did the web administration. I did the payroll, not payroll, it was, sorry, human resources. I knew everybody's salaries. What else? That was the first time I ever public spoke, because they had me, because I did the web administration, where other companies bought, we had the parent website, and then they bought something from us, so it became part of, linked to our website. I had to go and do a presentation to our members in Canberra. I had to organize the event in Canberra. I had to do all of that as well. But I was only paid $45,000.
Yeah.
And
and so that's about a third of what, yeah, because obviously during that time it's probably triple. You triple the pound.
That's right.
To get the base salary. Yeah, no, just because obviously it's floating, so
yeah,
you got to get the right decade as well.
Well, you're going back to 1999, so roughly 2000, the year 2000.
Yeah.
Or 2000, 2001. But actually, no, it was before I lost my first child. So it was 19, no, it was, yeah, it was, yeah, or was it? It might have been after, actually. Okay. No, before, but because I just, the reason why I'm trying to put this into my head in the chronological order, and that is because we got married 6 months after I got here in November 99, and by June, it was actually longer than 6-7 months, and so months. June 2000, we got married, and we had what one would call a honeymoon baby, and found out we were pregnant, and I was unbelievably excited to be pregnant. I always wanted to be a mummy, because I would give that baby all the love, I'd protect that baby, all the stuff that I didn't feel that I got completely in my life. But it was almost, I was so excited. And then the baby got sick, and she had fetal hydrops, which is fluid retention around all the vital organs. And they couldn't identify exactly what it is, because otherwise they can hospitalize you, intravenous drip the baby, and sometimes save the baby's life. And they couldn't, and I delivered her, and she was stillborn. And that was the day, so I've had the most terrifying day of my life, and then I had the day where my heart, nothing else compared to the day my heart broke into a million pieces. And no parent should have to bury their child. And I remember after she was born, and we named her, and I was holding her, and we've got very painful photos of us holding her, which is horrible. It's horrible. I can't look at the photos. I've got them, but I'm still not able to look at them, because I don't think you ever get used to the loss of a child. You learn to accept it, but you never get used to the loss of a child. And I remember my husband wheeling me down outside, because I had to get outside. And there was another woman there who was about 7 months pregnant. She had a glass of wine in her hand and a fag in the other hand. And she goes, "What you in for?" I thought, "Well, I'm not in prison." You know, when you just got these random thoughts go through your head. I said, "My baby's just died." And she goes, "Oh, probably a good thing. I'm on my third cesarean." And my husband, I just burst into tears. And my husband wheeled me off, and he said that's the only time he's ever wanted to thump a lady, because he was in as much pain as I was. And that was that took me a long time to get over, losing your child. And actually, interestingly, when things like that happen, the amount of people, so Nick's grandmother came out of the woodwork to tell us her first child had stillborn. My auntie told me her first child was stillborn. My grandmother told me her third or prior to between her the stillborn. So it's amazing how many people suddenly are willing to tell you their stories to help you understand you're not on your own